Hello everybody and welcome to another video. Those of you who have been following me on Twitter, those of you who have been following Matt Visual and a few others on Twitter will have known something's been up. Some big change is coming to Guild Wars 2. Well, this was announced today. This is a massive overhaul to the way traits are working, and in particular the specifics of what ArenaNet's specialization system for Heart of Thorns is going to be. Now, everything I'm talking about here sounds like it is going to be dropped in an update before the expansion pack. So, you do want to pay attention. This will change things up massively. I am like 80% hugely in favor of the changes they're making here. But these are some sweeping differences that are coming to the game. I'm going to try and explain it to you guys in my own words as best as possible. And explain what I think is positive about the new system and what is negative about the new system. So, we'll take it piece by piece. But high level, what they've tried to do is take what was crappy about traits and what was crappy about leveling and skill points and what was crappy about the game's ability to like expand into the future by continually adding more like subclasses or specializations, and they wanted to refine all of that and make it a lot better. So traits have completely changed, as have a few other things, and a huge balance pass is coming before Heart of Thorns drops. I'm going to talk about each element in small chunks, and then it'll all come together and you'll see how it works. So the first thing I want to mention is the stats decoupling from trait lines. You guys might remember, some of you who have been watching for a while, last year I did a pretty controversial video on the topic of leveling in Guild Wars 2 and how I would change things to make it a lot more classic RPG style. In that video I discussed many changes, a few that were quite offensive to the idea of Guild Wars 2, the idea of making permanent decisions that you can't really go back on easily. But one thing I did very much suggest and very much cared about was the idea of decoupling stats from trait lines. What I mean by this is, currently, if you go into one line, you will get power plus, say, condition duration. If you go into another line, you might get precision and ferocity. Or you'll get some other arbitrary two stats that don't seem to make much sense, and only really there for the flavor of the line. Well, these are now no longer going to exist. Don't be scared. This doesn't mean all players across the board are being nerfed. Those stat points, that equivalent power, is going to be returned to our builds, which I'll talk about in a second. But the motivation behind this change, behind removing these stats from, say, so you're an elementalist, you'll no longer get power for trading into fire magic. Fire magic is just fire magic, and all that matters are the traits you collect there. Why have they done this? Because in many situations, Ellie wasn't so bad, but in many situations, people were having to spec into lines that gave them stats they never cared about. A really good classic example is Condition Necromancers have a very powerful condition-based trait, Grandmaster trait, at the very end of their power line. They would gain all of this power plus 300 power for their build, just so that they could inflict burning on their Condi builds. This was really terrible. Number one, the Necromancers didn't really want to go in that line at all. They'd probably rather spend the points on some more conditioned damage for themselves. And second, it meant that there were a lot of power running around in builds that were trying to be pure Condi builds. And so a lot of the builds in Guild Wars 2, though they are distinct in many ways, weren't as distinct as they could have been. We've never really had truly pure Condi builds in Guild Wars 2 because often people are picking up random points of power in other areas, and this kind of diluted the difference between the various specs you could play. Necromancer with Condi was not the only example, another really big one, not that many people run them anymore, but Trap Rangers were essentially going through the same thing, and many more specs across the board. Well, now they've decoupled these points, so we never have to look that far into it, and a lot more builds can be far more distinct already. And what is even better about this, though, is those stat points, that equivalent power we would have got from our traits page, from having spent trait points, is now being returned to us in two ways. Number one, the base value for our primary stats in the game has always been 926. Okay, so if you had no additional power on your build whatsoever, which would be a rare treat to see, you're going to have 926 power. What they're doing is they are bumping all of these up to a flat 1000. So everyone is at least getting some kind of flat celestial-ish buff to all of their stats. Then also, ArenaNet are actually making the gear we acquire more powerful and more impactful for our build. This is the really cool thing. This is the thing I'm incredibly excited about, because putting more weight and more stats, more strength on the gear we choose actually means that the gear element of the game is now a little bit more fun. And I'll try to explain my reasoning there by looking at very similar stat sets, okay? So look at Assassin's gear and Berserker's gear in the game currently. They both give you the exact same 3 stats. The only difference is they have different weightings. One of them is giving you more power, one of them is giving you more precision. Now, many people know, especially those who are super into the maths of the game, that Assassins is definitely better in some situations than Berserker, but actually through the course of gameplay, for most players, you won't notice too much of a difference. There is a difference there, but it's not too pronounced. And because it's not too pronounced, you tend to find a lot of people will go for, say, their Berserker gear and never really care about going for their Assassin stuff. This can mean that people quit the game a little bit earlier than they'd otherwise like to, or it can mean that people who do make that investment to go to Assassins instead of Berserker don't feel really rewarded because they don't feel enough of a difference to have thought that the change was warranted. Well, now that there's more weight on those stats, this should be a lot more noticeable for people. Assassins will be giving more crit chance, while Berserkers will actually be giving more flat power, and we should see more of a difference. These aren't the only 2 stat sets. You can look at all kinds of things like Sentinels and Soldiers gear, tons of the different Condi sets. It's all over the place, and now we may actually feel like there's a bit more of a difference to be seen. There are some other perks of this as well. Hopefully we'll care a bit more about gear while we're leveling now, if it's got more equivalent power associated with it. And of course, the most important thing with this entire change is that we will have more stats in the attributes we choose specifically. We won't be picking up a ton of random vitality because we were going into our vitality line for flat DPS boosts. In short, the glassy builds we make will feel glassier. They will have more obvious strengths, and also, very importantly, especially when it comes to PvP, they're going to have, hopefully, more glaring weaknesses as well. This is something I thought Guild Wars 2's needed for a long time, and I'm incredibly excited about the change. So that's number one thing, and I don't know how much I'm overstating this change at the moment, because they are ultimately upping everyone's base stats globally too. Dreamworld, I would have liked to have seen them kept it at 916 for all the base stats, and load it all into gear, just to accentuate the, hopefully, positive points that I've just made. But otherwise, I think it's a really, really decent change, and something I'm looking forward to toying around with. The next big change that is coming, the piecemeal thing I'll talk about, is the fact we're actually getting more power for our traits now. We're getting the equivalent of 4 extra points. So, currently in Guild Wars 2, you could max out 2 lines. I could max out fire, I could max out air, and then I could just go 2 points into another line, or 2 other lines. I could go 2 into arcane, earth, or water. Well, now we're getting 4 extra points on top of that, so that actually means now, once the change goes through, you will be maxing out 3 lines. That means you will get a lot more to play with, and most importantly to me, you'll actually have access to 3 very potent traits, 3 Grand Masters. This should be quite obvious why this is so good. There are tons of builds out there. I'm sure everyone listening to me right now has tried to make a build at some point and thought, if I just had 2 more points, or 10 more points as it used to be. Well, now you actually get those. You get 4 more points, and that really opens up a lot more specs to become viable. It essentially means that any build you look at in Guild Wars 2 across any game type right now that only specs into 3 lines, which is a vast amount of builds, these are just flat out going to get better. You are, as a player, are going to have more stuff to play with. This alone could explode the amount of builds we see existing, and that's not even once they start improving the system as like future expansions drop, which I'll talk about very soon. There is a catch, however. Builds that currently invest in 4 lines, or perhaps all 5 lines, which are rarer, these builds might not be flat out buffed. And this is because they are making a change to the way we spend points into trait lines. In fact, there are no more points. The idea of going 66002 or something, that doesn't exist anymore. Instead, you just pick 3 lines, and those are the lines that you have max. There's no, like, half-arsing it into a line. So, for example, on Warrior, I know that a lot of Warriors will really like to make that 3-point investment in their bottom line so they can get fast hands. Well, now that's not going to be so possible. And so a lot of those builds that used to go across 4 or more lines, they're going to have some tweaking. Overall, though, even though I think this might eliminate a few builds, we'll see them pop up again, just altered, and ultimately this means, again, that the builds we have in Guild Wars 2 are very distinct. They're doing specific things. They're not kind of slopping around into lots of different places, which ultimately I don't find very fun. I like the idea of there being very well-defined roles, and depending on the build you've chosen, it can really dramatically change the way you are playing your character. Now, mathematically, I was talking to World of Enders about this. He was kind of concerned that because because we no longer like have points we can put in arrays, it sounds like there's way less potential builds like possible in the game, and mathematically that is true, but I'm thinking in practice, especially combined with the fact they are overhauling many of the traits themselves, we'll actually see a lot more build variety come from this. Oh, and just to be clear, the idea of maxing out a line instantly, of choosing fire, choosing air, choosing water, whatever you like, that's just called specializing. So that's going to tie into the way our classes are expanded in the future. So very quickly, I did just say yes, many of the traits themselves are having a balanced pass looked at. They gave us an example in the blog post of the water magic line, and they've done a lot of very cool things here. First of all, the traits we have available have all been condensed. There's like on average 3 less traits less to choose from, but many of those old functionalities have just been merged together. So currently Elementalist has 2 different traits. One that reduces water weapon cooldowns, one that it means they do 10% more damage while above 90% health. Well, both of those traits have gone together now, so in that one slot you get faster cooldowns and you get the more damage. They've got a couple of new looking traits in there too, and they've been kind of clever about the way they do it, because now water magic doesn't automatically mean you get health and you get healing power. Each time you choose a trait, you know, Master, Grandmaster, or Adept, you will actually quite clearly be presented with kind of a defensive option, kind of a middle of the road utility option, and an offensive option. So if I wanted, I could specialize into water magic, and I could choose in my first slot to do 20% more damage to vulnerable foes. I could choose in my second slot to do 10% more damage while at high health, and in my third slot I can choose to do more damage per boon on me. So this is really positive, and it means no matter what kind of build you're making, hopefully there will be a relevant trait for you, and because there are less traits now, they can be a lot more potent too, and actually fun to choose. We shouldn't have this situation anymore where we're dumping a load of points into a line, and we're picking in like that slot 1 just something just because. Like, it has no real synergy with what we're attempting to do. It's just there, and that was all over the old trait system. Hopefully now all of them will feel fun and kind of change up the way we want to play the game and things we want to be mindful of while we're running that build. And so there have been a lot of other cool changes too. One of the old Elementalist Grandmasters, Aquatic Benevolence, your heals on other characters are worth 25% more. This is now just the thing you automatically pick up as a minor, as a passive of the line, and the old minor has now become a selectable Grandmaster, which presumably will be buffed back to its original levels. So this is all really positive stuff, and we've only had one line as an example, but if we can expect that across all lines, you know, many of the vampirism traits in Necromancer I'm expecting to be combined together, this should be really cool. There is certainly an element of the new trait system I'm not liking the look of, and that is the fact that we can no longer choose previous tier traits in later slots. So currently in the game, if I unlock my Grandmaster slot in Fire Magic, I can choose to have one of the Grandmasters available, or I can use one of the previous traits. And there was certainly incentive to do that in many situations across many of the classes and many of the lines. That's no longer possible. You only get to pick Grandmasters and Grandmaster slots, you only get to pick Masters and Master slots, and so on. I really can't see any very compelling reason for the devs to have done this. Yes, you can say it helps them to keep balance in check as they continue scaling this system and dropping more stuff in, but ultimately those traits are gonna have to be balanced anyway. All they're looking at by allowing us to take any of the previous ones in later slots is synergy amongst that line itself, and that should be pretty obvious if that stuff is broken. So I really don't think that this is helping them too much, and it does cut down on a lot of our options. You can make the argument that because they are combining many of the traits together, we may never really want to do that anyway. We may never anymore want to run an Adept trait in a Grandmaster slot, but that remains to be seen. I think there probably will be situations where we want all 3 Adepts, but we don't have that choice anymore. I don't really foresee ArenaNet going back on this. To me, based on the screenshot they gave us, it kind of looks like this is just design led by the UI they've created. Like, it does look very cool and intuitive and nice, the new UI for assigning points in trait lines, but I still don't think that that's necessarily the best thing for the game. We'll just have to see how they balance the new traits around this new system and the fact we only get 3 options per line. Now, if this sounds, you know, the lack of being able to assign points and the fact we're only going to get 3 decisions at each juncture per specialization, if this sounds like they've removed a lot of options for us, I would say 2 things. Number 1, don't forget an awful lot of build making is not just your trait page. It's the sigils you run, it's the runes you run specifically, and the synergy between those runes and the skills you're using, as well as your weapons too. There is an awful lot more to build making. If you look at the build series I've been been running with World of Enders over on his channel, you'll actually find a lot of those crazy, kooky, weird builds that we made are totally still possible under the new system, because what's fun and weird about them is totally relying on the skills combination they're using with the traits and the gear, like all together. This is maybe reducing a little bit of variety in the trait system, but again, a lot of it should be much more potent. So I'm pretty confident, as I said at the start of this video, about 80% confident this is actually going to be a really positive change. The second thing I would point out is that this system will be expanding with the future. They seem to have specifically set this up so that when Heart of Thorns drops, don't forget this will probably come before Heart of Thorns, when Heart of Thorns drops, they can just now add whole new trait lines to classes, or as they're now called, specializations. So the example they gave was the Ranger. We already know that Ranger will specialize into Druid with Heart of Thorns. Well, they talked to us about the idea of an elite specialization. This is something that if you choose to invest in it and you max this set of traits out, not only will you get a bunch of traits to play with, but this will also unlock for you a new weapon to play with and a full new set, a full new complement of utility skills, a new heal, a new elite, and full utility slots. You're only ever going to be able to have one elite specialization at once, but forever more now with Guild Wars 2, they can just keep dropping elite specializations into the game. I don't know whether they're going to add any more core specializations. That would be something interesting to ask them. But they can keep adding these elite specializations into the game, and it only takes a few more before mathematically the new system is already on par with the old system in terms of the amount of options players have. And as you can imagine now, how we describe the builds we have to one another, it's not about, oh, 64202 or anything now. Instead, it's going to be, oh, hey, I'm a druid that specialized in beast mastery and nature magic. And that's kind of it, and people can choose very quickly what you chose, and they're done. So this is a positive element of the game, and personally I quite like the flavor of just being able to say, hey, I am a Tempest Ellie that is specialized in fire and water. Not that Tempest Ellie is actually going to be a thing. So that's specializations. That's how it works. That's the new trait system. Obviously we don't have too many examples. They did say that there will be a live stream running tomorrow, a very long one, where you can ask the devs specifically your questions about this transition. You guys might notice that if they're decoupling stats from trait lines, what is going to happen exactly to boon duration, what is going to happen to condition duration. We don't actually have convincing gear sets in the game right now that augment those. Does that mean they're not going to become functions of gameplay anymore? They're not going to be build things at all? Or are we getting some new gear sets that will impact condition duration and boon duration? I would like to see the latter of those options, of course, and we've got some of it right now with givers, but we don't have full complements of those sets. I've got a couple of other questions too. For example, we got Elementalist Water as the example line. That is where a full damage trait used to exist. All classes have a full damage trait somewhere, and now Elementalist doesn't. Does that mean these are being removed from the game? Lots of other small nitpicky things like that, which I guess we will hopefully have answered tomorrow. That's not all though. They have also changed a little bit of the way we acquire traits and stuff, as the system is so different now. And again, I kind of take you guys back to this video I did last year, where I was proposing specifically not just this stat decoupling, but I wanted to see a level up system where as we explored the world, we'd get points we can kind of invest into different attributes. Arena haven't done exactly that, but I do like how similar this is to what I was really hoping to see for the game, and I'm hoping leveling will be a lot more fun now after the change. In a nutshell, everything now will unlock with a new currency called hero points, and skill points are being scrapped. So let's look at that second thing first of all. You're probably all sat there thinking, I've got tons and tons of skill points, what's happening? You will be compensated for the skill points you currently have. But skill points, let's face it guys, is essentially a useless currency. It's a bloated currency. People have got way too many of them. There's no sync that ArenaNet can convincingly add to the game. There's no amount of new skills they can put in the game. You know, you saw the new skills they added a while ago, costing 25 skill points in an attempt to maybe cull this down a bit. It's just beyond that now. There's way too many skill points. It kind of got destroyed the moment champ bags were a thing and they were dropping skill points out the wazoo, but it's been an issue for a long time now. So skill points are being removed. You will be compensated with, I believe, T5 or T6 materials for the amount you have in excess of reaching level 80 and completing all the skill challenges around the world. And they're kind of arbitrarily renaming the currency to hero points. So all skill challenges in the game will now be called hero challenges. The key difference with hero points though is, unlike skill points, which continued to be given to us every time we leveled up after we hit level 80 and could be gained from, you know, scrolls everywhere, hero points are a finite currency. You get hero points every time you level up, and you get hero points from completing skill challenges or hero challenges around the game. Once you are level 80, and once you have done all the hero challenges of the game, that's it. That's your lot. You've got all of the hero points that are out there. And this is a smart thing for them to do, because it means that those level 80 characters that have got everything will have everything unlocked. You spend these hero points on unlocking skills and trait lines, specializations alike, and once you've got everything unlocked, they can wait around, give us an expansion, and then you have to kind of go explore the new expansion areas, find those new hero challenges. Hero challenges, skill challenges can be a function of map design that people actually care about in the new maps, and use these to get a bunch more hero points so you can buy more specializations. So we're going to have this really, I've got a screenshot on the screen right now of what it looks like to spend these points. We're going to have this really interesting situation, especially in a couple of years where there's tons of elite specializations to go for, as well as core specializations. We're going to have this really interesting idea where as you level that character for the first time, you've got all these different lines and RPG options that you can spend these points in. Do you want to just invest massively into earth magic instantly, or water magic, as we can see in this screenshot? Just pile all in there so you're like a complete master of water magic really, really early? Or do you want to spread out? Do you want to maybe start spending it on all of these different skill lines down here also? And the more elite specializations that come into the game, the more weight there's going to be behind those decisions, because the longer it's going to be before you have absolutely everything maxed out. So this is really, really cool to me. I just love the look of this panel. I love the thought that now when I'm leveling, I will care that much more about going for skill challenges, and the idea of just seeing those percentages there on the left hand side, like, oh, you're 70% done with water, and you can kind of see it's just fantastic. I love the design of the UI, I love the feel of it, and I love how this is going to expand with time. One thing I do think deserves a little bit of note is the fact that this is obviously a complete 180 from the previous trait overhaul they did, in which we would unlock specific traits for doing specific things around the world. Now, I liked this idea. I've always liked the idea of specific areas of the world offering certain rewards to players, but this was rejected by many of the members of the community. It was shoddily implemented, and ArenaNet seemed to have just removed this element completely. Now we have a generic currency we get all over the world that we can spend on whatever we want. So if you were not a fan of the previous trait system, your voices have been heard, and we now have the complete opposite of that, which I can see its value, honestly. You will notice on the left there as well, there's something that says Tempest for Ellies. They did say as well, another thing, all skills in the game. Currently, you've got like classes of skills, so Ellies have got arcane skills and cantrips. But then there's also the odd skill that doesn't have a class, okay? So like Ether Renewal is one of the elemental skills. It doesn't actually have a class. It's not associated with anything. Tornado is one of their elites. It's not associated with anything. They did say all skills now will be associated as something. So Engineer, Mortar will now be classed as a kit, for example. And this is pretty cool. It means that you're going to get a lot more synergy from your traits when you trait for these kinds of skills. And that's what Tempest is here on this image. It's likely that Ether Renewal will become a Tempest skill, Tornado will become a Tempest skill, and so on. You've got like Conjuration there, it makes me think of the Elder Scrolls. It's going to be so cool. Minor note as well on the idea of skills. There are many skills which interact with traits at the moment. This is actually something I very much enjoy about the game. So for example, Necromancer Wells is what they talked about. By default, these things, if you use a well, it will just drop around you, point blank AoE, but you can trait for it to make it ground targeted. They're saying that in a lot of those situations, the traded effect will now be the default. So Wells, after this change, will just always be ground targeted. You don't have to trait for that anymore. I actually think that I don't enjoy this very much about the system. I would like to have seen, since essentially now we just go wholesale into a specialization, and it's like, okay, you go into the specialization and you get a bunch of passives associated with it, those three minor traits. I would have just liked them to have changed it slightly so specializations have passives. Why do we have to have minor and major trait distinctions now? Why don't we just have adept, master, and grandmaster traits that we choose? And these minors, they're not called traits anymore. They're nothing. They're just specialization passives. And ArenaNet could then add as many or as few passives as lines need to feel fun. You know, we do have a very stupid situation in Guild Wars 2 right now, where not every single specialization or trait line for every single class needs 3 minors. A lot of the time we end up with stupid ones that just apply random bleeds on power builds that we don't care that are there when we're playing the power character, and make it feel less fun when we're a Condi character, because we don't quite know which of those 25 bleeds are actually ours. you know? So I'd love to see these kinds of things just be culled away, and they should just have specialization passives, in my opinion. Those passives can be stuff like, oh, your wells now are ground targeted. So the default functionality of wells can be they are point blank AoE, but if you as a necromancer specialize into curses, oh, now your wells become ground targeted. We don't have to choose it as a trait, so they still get the perks that they're looking for here, but then there's still that fun build making decision we get to make, right? I think that would be cool, but it doesn't seem like that's what they're going with anyway. That's about it. That's the new change in a nutshell. That's what I like about it, what I'm a little bit worried about with it, where I wish they'd done things slightly differently. Certainly, the meta in all three game types, I guess, is going to change quite a lot. I've actually already seen a video by Nike where he talked about just, you know, for pure PvE, where all people care about is DPS, kind of what new traits people will be able to pick up if they manage to get these 4 extra points worth of power. And just a lot of cool things are going to be shaking up, even before the elite specializations come with Heart of Thorns. Let me know what you guys think. Are you worried that now we've got way less options? It is kind of funny to look at the trait system and how we started being able to put every little minor point. We got to, you know, we can just go for just plus 10 power if we really wanted, to then just having, you know, the system where we get 1 point is worth a trait, and now we have no points at all. We just go fully into lines. But I do think this is positive for the game, and I do think we'll see a lot of really cool stuff come out of it. Love to hear what you guys think. Thanks very much for watching. I know it's been a bit longer, but it's a pretty big thing, and I guess I'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one, everyone.